joining us today. We are going to hang out for just a minute here to make sure that everyone can join and get settled in. So we do have some amazing guests, so be sure to grab a drink and a snack so that you don't miss a thing. I'm coming to you from Bozeman, Montana, where we are finally getting a little bit of sunshine today. Travis, how are you? And how's it looking? Are you in Kentucky today?
I'm in Kentucky, yes, about an hour north of Nashville, Tennessee.
And what's your weather? Is it warm and beautiful?
It's warm, yeah. I think it's pushing 80 degrees today and
Oh my
sunny.
gosh. You should be suntanning right now. Corey, how about you? Are you coming to us from Portland?
I'm coming to you from Portland, Oregon, and it is gray, and a little more gray outside. So pretty normal for this time of year.
Is it like 9 months of gray for you in Portland?
Pretty much, yep.
Okay. Great. And David, how about yourself? Where are you at?
I'm coming from Massachusetts, about an hour south of Boston on Cape Cod. If any of you have ever come here on vacation, that's where I am. And it's a gray spring day. We're kind of stuck between winter and spring right now. Spring arrives late around here.
Gotcha. I know. We still, in our yard, there's still like a foot of snow. So I'm like very skeptical about spring ever coming to Bozeman. All right. Well, we're just past the hour here, so I'm officially going to get us started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Amy Arno, and I am the Field and Event Marketing Manager on the XYPN marketing team. Today, I'm thrilled to co-host this event, How to Manage Compliance as an RIA Firm Owner from Initial Registration to SEC Registration, with Managing Director of XY Compliance Solutions, Travis Johnson. He's my co-host today. Our panelists today are XYPN members Corey Beal and David McPherson. I do just want to point out a few housekeeping items before we get going. On the right, the top tab that you see is the chat function, and that is where we will be dropping any resources that we mentioned throughout our conversation today. Below that is the Q&A module, so if you do have any questions for us to address throughout the session, please submit them there. We have some questions that were submitted beforehand, so we will be answering a mix of both pre-submitted and questions asked live throughout our conversation today. At the end, to exit the webinar, please click back to the lobby on the top left of your screen. You will see a feedback survey pop up when you leave this event. We would love for you to take a moment to complete that, and also please submit any ideas for topics that you would like to see us chat about in the future. Also, be sure to register for next month's free event, How to Know When It's Time to Go, Top Tips for a Smooth Transition from Your Current Firm. And that will be with XYPN members Gerald Hendrick and Ryan Foster. And that event will be held on May 3rd, and you can find the link to register in the chat. Last thing for today, our network navigators host office hours every month. It's a safe space to ask questions about launching a firm and also about what it means to truly join XYPN and become a member. So this month you can join them on Wednesday, April 16th at 1 p.m. Mountain Time, and we'll put the link to register for that in the chat as well. Okay, well, thank you to our guests for their patience as they got through that. I would now love to have our crew here introduce themselves. I will start with my co-host, Travis. Will you kick us off and please introduce yourself and your role at XYPN?
Absolutely. Hey, everyone. Travis Johnson. I lead the compliance solutions team at XY Planning Network, really through the development and delivery of all of our compliance offerings and resources, and serve as a subject matter expert on kind of all things RIA compliance for our membership and our team.
Amazing. Thank you. Now, Corey, will you please tell us a little bit about yourself, your firm, and your experience with compliance?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Corey. I am the CEO and Director of Joy of Empowering Finance, and I launched my firm in January 2021. I'm a fully virtual firm, and I have clients spread out all across the U.S., from Hawaii all the way to New York, so quite a bit of clients. Launched with 0. I'm now up to about 95, so I am dual registered in both the state of Oregon and California right now, getting close to some other states, so have a little bit of experience in being registered with 2 different states. And for me, with launching my firm, I am a solo person, so I would say compliance was the number one thing I was most freaked out about, because in my previous roles at other firms, I was, solely a financial planner, and that's what I did, and I didn't ever have to do compliance. So this was definitely the roadblock for me, and I was really scared, and I was really, really happy to to be able to partner with XY, because I don't think I would have been able to do any of this on my own. I know Travis will probably talk about this, but there's 2 different packages, I think, for, registering your firm. And I picked the one that I could, have live assistance, because I really wanted somebody who I could speak with throughout the process, because the thought of like emailing, I don't know, I'm a little older, maybe it's like the dinosaur in me, but I really wanted somebody to hold my hand through the process, since I didn't really know anything about it. And Kendra with XY made the process incredibly smooth. It was awesome, awesome, awesome. I can't say enough fabulous things about Kendra. I absolutely adore her. And got registered in Oregon, and probably, I think, about 6 months into my firm, I met the de minimis for California, so I got registered there as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
David, how about you? Will you introduce yourself, your firm, and your experience with compliance?
Sure. So my name is David McPherson. I'm the owner and founder of Four Ponds Financial Planning, which is based in Mashpee, Massachusetts, which, as I mentioned before, is on Cape Cod by the beach. And I started my firm a few years earlier in January of 2007. I was state registered for the first 14 years, I believe. And in the summer of 2021, I became SEC registered as my firm grew. And for the first 13 years, compliance was pretty boring, because I was never audited by the state of Massachusetts. And as I neared SEC registration status, I kind of hoped that I'd be able to escape into federal registration without a state audit. But then I had back-to-back audits with the state, and then shortly thereafter, the SEC, and they actually overlap. For 2 years, audits were a daily part of life, and I got through it thanks. I've been working with Shelby Brown, who's on the XY compliance team. I had met Shelby before she became an employee of XY, and I've been working with her since. I went back and looked at my notes since about the late 2019. I've been working with her nonstop, and it's been a good experience.
Great, amazing. Well, I can't wait to hear all the insights that all of you have. So I'm going to go off camera for a little bit and turn it over to Travis to get us started with the questions, and I will see you at the end of the hour. Travis, you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. As Amy mentioned, we're going to go through some of the pre-submitted questions that have come in. We'll work through those. I'll provide a little bit of my thoughts, some knowledge I have in some of these areas and background and experience there. And then I'll have Corey and David provide experience on a handful of these questions, just any experiences they've had, or some of these questions, maybe how they would think about as CCOs of their own firms going through some of these activities. So to kick it off, one of the first questions here is, what is typically involved in a regulatory audit, and how best can a solo advisor start preparing in advance so it's a low stress and successful experience? So I'll go through this a little bit, and David, I know you just mentioned all of the experience you had kind of overlapping with 2 different jurisdictions. Corey, you've done a lot of work in kind of setting yourself up for success for when you do get your first exam, so we'll kind of dive into that. But really, more broadly, what's involved in a regulatory audit? It's really your jurisdiction, whether that be the state or the SEC. It's an opportunity for them to come in and ensure that those who are providing investment advice, whether that's investment management or just advice only through financial planning, those that are providing that investment advice to investors in their jurisdiction in that state, that they are doing so within the confines of the regulatory rules and laws, regulations that you're subject to in that jurisdiction. What that means in practice is really doing a review of your investment activities, your advertising around the services you provide, your books and records. Do you have adequate books and records displaying kind of either your financial reporting requirements, what you say you're going to do for clients, your disclosures, your billing practices that tie into that. But ultimately, when it comes back to this, what do you tell your clients you're going to do for them? How can you substantiate or demonstrate that that's being done? And how do you ensure that you're charging for it consistent with those disclosures and what the clients are agreeing to? In addition to that, there's a lot of kind of the hot topics recently are around data security. That's going to be an increasing focus of really every jurisdiction with the SEC in the states is data security, whether that be physical or cybersecurity. Increasing number of cybersecurity breaches, even in the financial services industry. It's got regulatory attention. Very recently, even the SEC has and several states have released risk alerts and guidance in these areas. Many of which we can probably provide links to kind of on a case-by-case basis as needed. But data security, and I would say that if you're a firm that's highly investment focused and you have an ESG or SRI strategy, the SEC is increasingly focused on how advisors are marketing and adhering to accurately kind of the ESG strategies that they claim to be following. So there's some things around that that can kind of get more specific, but I would say data security, record keeping, advertising, and disclosures are really big piece of the exams and what to expect there. But more so how to prepare for those is kind of going into it as a newly registered firm or even a firm that's been in business for a few years, has adopted some practices and just started growing and hasn't been examined yet. Some of the best things you can do, at least in my experience, to prepare for these is one, for those that are just getting started, don't put compliance on the back burner. It's very easy to do. You're probably never going to have more time as your firm grows. You're only going to have less time to dedicate to compliance. So putting into place effective compliance policies and procedures, efficient practices, kind of repeatable processes, really look at compliance as just another administrative function of your business. It just has regulatory rules that back it up. But as you're building out your CRM, your document storage, just think of the compliance implications of these things and that you will need to supply a lot of this stuff upon request from regulators. So keeping compliance in mind when you're kind of building out all of those processes is a good starting point. But David, if you want to kind of kick off with kind of what you've done or kind of either your experience during the exam or leading up to preparing for it, and we can kind of talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, my best advice from the beginning when you're starting your firm is just try to be organized and systematic. And so you want to have a good CRM, use it from the beginning. You want to have organized files. You can look for templates for different types of file structures. And I don't think you need to follow one specific file structure, but you want to be consistent in how you approach file organization. And the last thing, not the last thing, but another key thing is maintaining accurate, books in your own books, your financial records, to make sure you're reconciling your accounts. I would not do it on an Excel spreadsheet. You want to use QuickBooks or some other accounting software. So the more organized you can be from the beginning, the better prepared you'll be. And typically in both at the state and when I had SEC audit, they kick it off with a letter that they send to you with, they're going to request a variety of documents. And the requests from the state and the SEC differed in a few ways, but there was a lot of overlap. And you want to be able to just kind of check off each item, but they will ask for a lot of records in the beginning. And it starts with that letter, and that's what I worked from.
Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't mention that earlier. So the structure of these exams, while they will vary from state to state and the SEC, is in almost every case that I've seen, it starts off with a document request letter, a document request list. Could be anything from a dozen to a couple dozen items. I think the average number of those items, even at the SEC level, has been increasing in the last couple of years based on their priorities. But that document request letter, this is the kind of the higher level kind of documentation that's going to drive the rest of the exam, or at least the better part of that exam, around kind of a list of clients and then a subset of lists based on whether or not you have discretionary trading authority over some of those client assets. And then from there, they may ask for copies of agreements, and eventually they'll get to maybe asking for a sampling of clients. Hey, for these 10 clients, I want copies of custodial statements, invoices, client agreements, if financial plans, if you provided a deliverable, a financial plan, and then records of any other document delivery or service delivery that they may want to see, some sort of demonstration of delivery of there. But yeah, thanks for bringing up the document request list. Corey, do you want to talk about a little bit, for the work that you've done, kind of really in the past year, focusing on kind of strengthening your compliance program and kind of making sure you're prepared for that eventual audit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I haven't been audited by either state yet, but I did get a notice on Monday for online for the state of California. So it was just a request for a lot of documents. And for me, how I manage my compliance is I work with one of the advisors at XY, Patrick Knoll, who is amazing, amazing. And I think he was a past auditor for the state of Texas.
Yeah.
So we meet quarterly and just go through like all of my tasks I need to do, see if I need to update any documents, my ADV, those kinds of things. So I meet with him on a quarterly basis. And then on a monthly basis, I do, all my books, updating documents, making sure everything is, saved and archiving correctly. The really nice thing with XY is there's two programs that, really help you with compliance. There's XY Archive, which is awesome. It archives, your social media, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, those kinds of things, email, all of that. So it's really hands off once you link everything. And then the other program is Smart RIA. And so what I did with the XY team was go through and made all the tasks like applicable to me, and also rewrote some of them to make them a little more understandable in English, because some of them I was like, I don't really understand what it's asking me to do. So just staying up on all of these Smart RIA tasks as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those that aren't familiar yet with Smart RIA or similar tools, Smart RIA is a compliance technology solution. At its core is a task management system. It's to help you manage your compliance tasks and ultimately drive the management of an effective compliance program for your firm as you grow and kind of scale. So it's kind of a proactive compliance checklist, if you will, that can be entirely tailored for your firm. Based on kind of the subset of tasks that are relevant for your firm at that time, and then when and how you complete them to help you kind of stay on track. And Smart RA is included with XYPN membership there. There are similar tools throughout the industry, and some other compliance consulting firms kind of either have their own or also partner with Smart RA. But the Smart RA is one that we've seen a lot of the industry and specifically XYPN members use throughout being a solo advisor all the way up to having numerous IARs under them, and it has worked well, especially in more recent years. All right, and John Mullen had a question here. So I imagine these letters are rather boilerplate. Would it be possible to see an example? John, there are several states, and I think the SEC even does make available copies of their document request letters. That is something that I think we even have, just our team internally has examples of these from various states just that have been made available during trainings. I think Pennsylvania and a handful of other states I'm thinking of, trying to think of more recently, that some of these states that do annual investment advisor trainings sometimes make available copies of their document request list to help just equip advisors with kind of the expectations of what they're likely to see during those exams. So if you do some online searching, it is there. If you reach out to probably our sales team, I'm sure they can get you a copy of those. It may not be specific to your state. It just depends on kind of whether they have that available or whether we have a copy of one that can be made available as well. But yeah, you're right. They are generally, document request letter is fairly boilerplate. It's a start to kind of kick off the exam. All right, let's go to kind of another question here, but similar, and I can probably cover this one pretty quickly. Is we get this question a lot: how often, on average, do audits occur at both the state registered and SEC registered firms? You kind of, if you heard the comment from David, being registered for a number of years at the state level without having ever been reached out from the state, and then ultimately getting audited by both jurisdictions as he was making the transition to SEC registered. Kind of in short, the examination kind of cadence varies widely from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I would say among the states, the standard does seem to be examining firms ideally every 3 years. However, that cadence or the state's ability to meet that is going to be dependent on their budget, their staffing, the resources that have been allocated to them. There's a handful of states out there that only have 1 to 3 examiners in their jurisdiction, even some of the larger states. There's some states like California that, even some of the larger states that have numerous investment advisor firms that have very well staffed securities divisions. And I think Colorado has half a dozen to a dozen senior examination staff there, and it varies widely. Where Minnesota might only have 2 to 4 examiners on the RIA side at most. So it does vary. And some of those, I think I've had advisors tell me in South Carolina that have gone a decade without having been experienced their first exam. Whereas states like Kentucky will examine firms every 2 years, almost on the dot. Ohio, I think, is in that 2 to 3 year time frame as well. The SEC, historically, it has varied. I think most recently I've seen the SEC's cadence after that initial first year exam. David mentioned that he was during that transition to SEC registration that he got examined. The SEC for a number of years now has prioritized what they kind of call their newly registered or never before registered registrant examinations. And really it's an opportunity for them to come in early on and ultimately make sure that you're kind of getting things set up right. Are you establishing good policies and procedures? Does the firm have the resources and understanding and kind of training across the firm to adhere to those policies and procedures, especially if you have additional employees? But that initial exam is usually going to be a little bit different than a future routine exam, where those subsequent exams may rely on what they saw during the initial exam, at least to kind of see, okay, have we seen improvement in these areas, and then also cover subsequent priorities that come up in future years that make the exam a little bit different. There are several states that do these first year exams where you can expect to be examined in the first 1 to 2 years. And for that same purpose, just making sure that, one, if there are any issues, we can help you get them resolved sooner before they become a bigger issue. And then just making sure that you're getting effective compliance practices in place. But yeah, outside of that first year exam, I think, for a state registered investment advisor, I'd be prepared to be examined about every 3-ish years. I mean, there's going to be some variance there. And at the SEC level, currently, I would say maybe every 3 to 5 years, depending on where you fall, kind of in their risk spectrum. For many peer RIAs don't have broker-dealer affiliations. It may be closer to that 5-year level. I think most recently it was on the 5-year. James Vermillion posted in here, Kentucky automatic exam after 6 months. Second exam came in year 2, and I believe subsequent years will also be every 2 years as well.
Travis, I just wanted to mention, so I had mentioned that I went 13 years without a state audit, and if there's anyone from Massachusetts listening, that is unusual. I'm pretty active in the local RIA community, and talking to many of my peers, they were all getting audits at various times, and for some reason, they missed me, and I knew I was on borrowed time. And actually, the longer I went without the audit, the more stressed out I got. I was like, can they just do it and get it over? So if you're in Massachusetts, don't assume that you're going to go 13 years. In fact, I was speaking with a colleague last week who started his firm 2 years ago, and he's already been audited within the first 2 years. So 13 years is very much the exception in this state.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that stems from, so I think 7 to 10 years ago, the SEC started prioritizing the examination of either what they called kind of never before examined, those that have been registered for years but haven't been examined, or newly registered firms. And once those priorities, and this is fairly true, I think, with a lot of jurisdictions, is when the SEC starts looking at this stuff, some of the states will start to listen and adopt some of those practices as well. Massachusetts, for instance, prior to that point, may have had a different approach to how they determined who to examine based on a number of factors, pulling information from your ADV Part 1, which has a lot of just regulatory disclosure information, and ultimately outputs some sort of list based on the risk inherent with those firms, affiliations, broker-dealer affiliations more specifically, prior enforcement actions, and other issues that might lead custody. For instance, if you have direct custody, you might be higher on that list. But then, once some of these states started really prioritizing trying to get to firms sooner, then there was, for firms like David's and other firms that kind of right before that time may have registered that just, immediately just got pushed off the list. And then, a decade later, they're now finally getting around to auditing those firms, while other firms have been examined, a couple times by that point. So that's a good example there. See, Alan had a question in here. I've heard advisors archiving all of their personal investment statements to show no front running to client trades. Is this necessary or overkill? We might get into some of these specific these sort of compliance specifics here a little bit later in here, but to answer that question, I would say that archiving all of your personal investment statements, you should have record of those. I don't know that, you're going to have quarterly transaction reports. You're going to have annual holding reports. It's part of your code of ethics requirements. I would say for a lot of solo advisors, those usually take the form of having copies of your statements and trade confirmations at any given time. And what regulators are looking for there is one, depending on kind of the risk and client base, in terms of code of ethics, the handling and use of any material non-public information, usually meaning no insider trading. And also, are you or your advisory personnel trading in any way that places your interests ahead of your clients? Front running is an example of that. Trying to trade ahead of client accounts, benefit from changes in market pricing. That is a common practice. Is yes, maintaining copies of your personal investment statements or ensuring that you have continuous access to those from the custodian is probably the easiest way to do that. Usually, it's one of the less burdensome tasks. As you grow and have more advisory personnel under your firm, if that's kind of your path, then you might need to get more formal quarterly transaction reports and stuff with that, as for record keeping and adequate compliance supervision.
Yeah, I know one of the tasks in the Smart RIA is to go get your statements. So I do archive my statements every month.
Okay. Yep. Perfect. All right, we can get into a couple other questions here. We have one question here around how much of compliance can be outsourced for a solo or small multi-advisor RIA, and what would something like this look like in terms of cost? I can kind of give a couple examples just from what XYPN offers and what to expect in the industry in general around that, and also just I want to speak to kind of outsourcing versus kind of the delegation of compliance functions versus just kind of consulting for support. Compliance as a solo RIA, and Corey, I think you might be able to speak to this as well, and David, you obviously over the years too. It shouldn't be a burden. Compliance as a solo RIA shouldn't feel like a burden once you get the appropriate kind of processes and kind of what David mentioned, the systemization in place. So that you know what needs to be done and when to do it, to where many solo advisors really shouldn't need to outsource compliance. I mean, you can have that chief compliance officer hat. Once you get that effective compliance program developed and implemented, and just make sure that you're doing the things that are required to be done as they come up. There really isn't a lot of tasks that require a huge amount of time throughout the year until you start adding additional investment advisor reps. It's the supervision element, I think, as CCO that really is where the kind of the burden of compliance in terms of time spent there on a regular basis starts to pick up. Other than that, it's really what I call kind of that an additional administrative function of your business. Just has regulatory ramifications, making sure that you need to do it. But within XYPN, we offer kind of, we have a lot of DIY guides, templates, resources for you to kind of pick up and start to develop that stuff. But we also offer the hourly consulting and ongoing compliance consulting support, kind of just solve kind of whatever needs you feel like that you have at that point in time. If it's just reaching out to us when you have specific issues come up or when you want to work through a specific project, we can support you on an hourly basis. Whereas if you want that recurring kind of connection with a compliance consultant to help you stay on track and ahead of your compliance program and work on it as you continue to grow, then the ongoing compliance consulting can come into play there. Hourly consulting at XYPN charge $300 an hour for. Our ongoing consulting will range anywhere from $475 to $2,000 a month. The kind of our $1,200 to $2,000 a month it's really pretty limited there to firms that are looking for a level of outsourcing or delegation of compliance functions. They've hit a point where they understand it, but they just don't have the time to focus on it, and they want to delegate the supervisory reviews, email archiving reviews, advertising reviews, really anything that they're doing to help either monitor, supervise their additional investment advisor reps. We can kind of take that on and have a reporting mechanism in place back to the CCO. So you still have the CCO accountability, but we can kind of take on some of those compliance functions. Throughout the industry, I've seen outsourced chief compliance officer services. I mean, that'll range anywhere from $3,000 to $6,000-$7,000 a month. Kind of usually, a third, about a half of what you can expect to spend to employ a full-time CCO. And I think it varies quite widely based on the size of the firm. Just a little bit of info there. David, Corey, kind of what's, any approach? I know you both have utilized our compliance services at different levels throughout kind of your tenure and XYPN membership. Kind of what's your take on kind of approaching this as a new or growing firm?
Yeah, so I think you just have to really get clear on where do you want to spend your time and where do you want to spend your money. And so for me, starting out launching with 0 clients, I had a lot more time than I did have money. And so I wanted to learn it myself just to see what it was going to take. And once I did, I was like, okay, I can do this. I probably spend 3 hours, regularly a month. And then at the end of each quarter, it's probably, another 4 hours. So it's not hugely time intensive for me. And I feel like I can do that. And then I work on the hourly basis with Patrick through XY and probably have a meeting, I think once a quarter, just to go through everything and make sure I'm doing all that. And for a little accountability, when I was looking at the different packages that XY had, I think you just have to know yourself best. Do you need an accountability partner to make sure that you do this, or are you going to be able to do it on your own? And so for me, I know that I could, hopefully do it on my own. And that's what I have been doing as well. So.
Awesome.
Yeah. And, when I first opened my firm, I kind of took a do-it-yourself approach. But as the firm grew, more clients, I started seeking out more and more help. And for the last, 3.5, 4 years, I've been using the monthly retainer consulting program, again, working with Shelby Brown. And it's worked out very well. When I had my state audit and then my SEC audit, I really relied on Shelby a lot to help me respond to the document request letters. There were a few wrinkles with the state of Massachusetts that very interesting. Their fault, not mine. But as you grow, it's a question of, is it the best way to spend your time? So I'm now at the point where I'm actually looking at outsourcing some of the ongoing tasks, such as monitoring employee email. I have 2 IARs under my firm. I'm probably going to be adding 2 more later this year. So I'm going to have 4 people I need to supervise. And the question is it the best use of my time to just kind of do this routine monitoring? And I'm looking, I haven't done it yet, but I'm looking at outsourcing those tasks, because it's just like I can do my own tax return, but it's not the best use of my time. And so, I pay to get my business and personal tax return done. And it's not, the other point I would make is, you don't want to put at risk what you've built. I've been doing this for, 16, 17 years now. In my view, the firm has been successful. And I don't want to put at risk what I've built over that time. And that's why I want to make sure it's done well. And I'm probably going to increase my outsourcing commitment.
Right. Good examples there. Appreciate it. Kind of moving forward from this, and I think we'll have a couple other questions that tie back to some of the compliance management and some of the specific things that we covered in these last few questions. The next few, these come up a lot, and I'm going to summarize these into one. But to read the questions there, it's around examinations, and is there a need to maintain any FINRA examination? Is one. 2, if I had Series 66 in the past, do I have to maintain this? And 3, would a CFP certification suffice in most states? So I want to go over what the exam and qualification requirement is in general to qualify as an investment advisor representative, which ultimately is required in order to register your RIA. And in the basic requirement is the Series 65 investment advisor law examination. That exam is kind of what would qualify you as from an education standpoint as an investment advisor representative to register under another firm or to register under your own firm. And to accomplish that or to meet that and other kind of through other avenues, those of you coming from a broker-dealer, wirehouse firm or situation, their employment situation, you may have the Series 66 and the Series 7. Those kind of broker-dealer, registered rep broker-dealer examinations there together, the Series 66 and evidence of passing the Series 7 also qualify you as an IAR in place of passing the Series 65. So you're not going to maintain the Series 7. Once you leave a broker-dealer, the Series 7 will drop off and expire after 24 months. As long as you register within those 24 months of leaving the broker-dealer with another firm, whether that be an existing RIA or your own, within that 24-month period, your Series 66 will stay on, and that's what you'll maintain indefinitely in place of having the 65. So it's maintaining the 66, and it's just showing evidence in your CRD record that you've passed the Series 7. Now, to take that a little bit further, there's also a series of designations that qualify you for as an investment advisor representative. The CFP is the most common, at least amongst our XYPN members. But there's also the CFA, those of you that have a CFA, a PFS. If any of you are CPAs, you may also have the PFS, the CIC, and the CHFC, Chartered Financial Consultant. So there's 5 designations: CFP, CFA, PFS, CIC, and Chartered Financial Consultant, CHFC. Those designations in general, the process might be different in a couple states. I'll get into that briefly, but across any state, basically, I haven't run into a situation where it wasn't approved following some correspondence with the state. Will satisfy your qualification requirement without having the Series 65. In some states, though, you are required to submit a waiver. So you have to pass their regulation states. You have to pass the Series 65. However, you may be able to request a waiver in place of other experience or examinations or designations that qualify as such. And in those states, it's simply a form you have to submit to qualify for that. And it's really rare. We've run into it, probably 1 out of every 50 to 100 advisors we see register. So that's an important note there. And I do want to kind of caution, just for the number of people that are on this call, there are a couple states, notably Minnesota has an experience requirement. It's evolved a little bit in the last couple of years. They'll allow more for it, but making sure that you review Minnesota Investment Advisor registration requirements. If you go to their webpage, for those that are in Minnesota, you can review that. They have kind of a notice on there, but you have to have supervisory experience at some level in 3 of the previous 5 years to qualify as an investment advisor rep. They have broadened that in the last, I think, 2021. To allow for really kind of any experience as an investment advisor rep within another firm or in the securities industry. And then I believe Connecticut has a couple years experience requirement as well that has some qualification requirements and exceptions that you can meet. So definitely some more case by case and that kind of specific scenarios, but the rest kind of in general are what we just discussed there. As we kind of get in kind of a little bit further into some of these without going too deep, the next question is handling multiple state registrations as a virtual advice-only planner with no AUM. So I'll cover this briefly. I think, Corey, this would be a good one for you as well. But in general, the advice only or kind of with no AUM isn't really going to impact the jurisdictions you need to register in. As a registered investment advisor, that you're receiving compensation for providing investment advice. The requirements, at least from a registration standpoint, are really the same whether you're managing those assets or not. Now, there might be some net capital requirements in various states if you are managing assets, say, with discretionary trading authority. California and several others might base that, have higher net capital requirements if you maintain discretionary trading authority, let alone if you have custody directly of those assets. Then there's a whole different suite of requirements there from a minimum financial reporting standpoint. But we have many advisors that kind of similar how kind of Corey explained her firm there around that work with clients, in a large chunk or all over the country while working remotely. Either from a private residence or from kind of different locations throughout the U.S. And the way that I usually answer this is kind of starting off when you prepare to launch your own registered investment advisor firm, you have to first get registered in the state where your primary place of business is located. The state where you're operating from is going to ultimately be, with very limited exceptions, is going to be your primary state or your home state. You have to first qualify as a registered investment advisor there before you can register in any other state. The one exception to this is if you can qualify for SEC registration. There's a few. We won't have time today to go through all the different ways to meet that, but in general, if you expect to have 100 million in assets under management within 120 days of registering, either you're bringing over an existing business from another firm or transitioning it from a broker dealer, then yeah, you can apply for SEC registration. That's the most common one, at least initially. Down the road, if you're subject to the registration requirements of at least 15 states, then you can transition to SEC registration regardless of AUM. So some of those are a little more specific, but I would say beyond that, though, as a state registered investment advisor, you first have to register in your home state, and then you're subject to the de minimis exemption, which, with the exception of Texas and Louisiana, you can have up to 5 clients in any of those states without first needing to register, as long as you don't also have a place of business in that state. So you have a place of business in one state, no other investment advisor reps working from any other state, then you can work with up to 5 clients in any of the other states before being required to register. And you must be registered, not be applying for registration. You must be registered before you take on that 6th client, which is an important note there. Corey, do you kind of want to cover a little bit maybe how you approached that? I know you eventually had to transition to registering also in California, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have 2 ways that I work with clients. I work on an hourly basis and I work on an annual comprehensive. So on my hourly basis, I don't manage any assets for those clients. On my annual comprehensive, I do manage those assets. So, I got registered in the state of Oregon. That was the process with Kendra. And then about 6 months in, I had to get registered with the state of California. And I had 4 clients at that time. And I knew I was going to start bringing on like another 2. So I went through that. It was pretty, I would say, a painless process going through. I think Patrick helped me do it. And it was just filing, I think, with FINRA and paying the fee, but it was a pretty painless process. There was a few changes I had to make to my client agreement. So I have a client agreement for everyone except the state of California. And then I have client agreements for the state of California that just has some different verbiage that California wanted me to add in there as well. And I just said a little earlier that I just got my first, audit request for online process of an audit on Monday. So don't know what that's like yet, but that's kind of the process. Pretty painless, not, I have to pay a little more, but that's about it.
Yeah. Let's see here. I know we have a few other questions rolling in. We have a few more I want to try to make sure we get through from the pre-submitted ones. One of them we just kind of covered, and then we had, I think this was also asked just during the call, and then recently and I can probably cover this, David, might be helpful to talk through your experience, but do we have any recommended SEC transition compliance consulting resources? I think it might be helpful to just talk through what the transition to SEC from state registration is like. I think, I'll briefly cover it and let David kind of explain his experience, but the transition to SEC registration, once you've deemed that you qualify for SEC registration, either through the AUM amount, kind of meeting or exceeding the 100 million, or the number of states you're subject to registration in, it has exceeded 15. Then you apply you submit a new application for registration with the SEC, just an ADV Part 1, and submission of your ADV Part 2, and then the Form U4. If those need amended, keep a separate conversation here. Is Form U4s always get filed with the state, not necessarily the SEC. You're registered at the state level individually, but your firm is registered with the SEC. Not to cause any confusion there, hopefully. But once you submit the application with the SEC, they're going to ultimately make sure essentially that the right boxes are checked on the ADV Part 1, that you submitted an up-to-date Part 2. And if there's anything out of the ordinary that they aren't used to seeing or they have questions about, they may follow up. Generally, though, 30 to 45 days later, you'll get an email from the SEC indicating that your firm has been approved. And if they do have any additional correspondence, usually someone from their staff will reach out for additional clarification, but it's pretty uncommon. David, you want to kind of go over, I don't know if that was consistent with your experience, or you want to kind of cover what you went through?
I mean, basically, I was, talking about it with my consultant, Shelby, as the firm grew, as the assets under management grew. I knew we were approaching the time when we would have to do that. So I think when we started having conversations when it was, 80, 85 million of AUM. And so we and I think what we did in preparation was kind of updated our policies and procedures manual, updated the ADV to make sure it kind of met with what the SEC would be looking for. And then it was just a question of waiting until I wanted to file. And I talked to Shelby. It's a little flexible on exactly when you file. And I I forget the exact amount, but when I got a little bit over 100 million in AUM, that's when we filed. I didn't want to file too early, have a big market correction, and I had to withdraw
Yeah.
my federal registration. So we were kind of cautious, and got past 100 million in registered. Last year, when the market took a dive, I was briefly under the 100 million threshold, but it recovered, and now we're well above it. So basically, I really relied upon a consultant. And if you're you're thinking of whether to outsource or not. If there's a time you're going to want some professional help, it's when you have to make that transition from state to SEC. I would not want to do that on my own.
Excellent. Yeah, great recap there. I think in terms of other resources around that transition, I mean, a lot of it, I think what David hit on that was important is kind of a review of your policies and procedures at that time. While the Advisors Act and kind of the SEC, the Advisors Act being kind of the regulation you're primarily governed under as a registered investment advisor, states do have their own sets of Securities Act and regulations. So, if you kind of went through the work, or whether with a consultant or on your own, reviewing the state's regulation, maybe guidance that they provided you, and crafting your policies and procedures around that, transitioning to SEC registration is a good time to take a look at that and see, okay, are there things that we changed here or that we feel might be different with the SEC? The advertising rule is a big one. The SEC recently overhauled, for those that kind of been following any sort of regulatory publication in the last few years, the marketing rule has been updated, which is kind of the first substantial change to it, since many of the aspects of that rule were still in effect from 1940. Methods of advertising have changed a little bit since 1940. And there have been just a kind of a whole list of guidance in the past few decades around the rise of the internet and social media, and kind of what does it mean. So now testimonials, where do they come into play? So many of you kind of going from state to SEC registration probably are going to have a policy that prohibits the use of testimonials, because there's still a lot of states that do prohibit it or restrict it in some manner, to then transitioning to the SEC and their regulation, which you need to make sure that you have a policy that is consistent with the new rule at that point, and is going to be probably substantially different, at least for the foreseeable future, depending on the state that you are in. Some states do default to SEC regulation in these respects, but it does vary.
I'm just going to mention briefly, I mean, there are differences in rules at the state level and SEC level. For instance, in Massachusetts, if you're managing assets and you're debiting the fees from the client's account, in Massachusetts, you have to send the client a billing statement that shows how the fee was calculated. You have no choice on that. When you get to SEC level, you don't have to do it. Because I did it for so many years, I'm still handling it in that way, even though I don't have to. So there are differences, and you really want to make sure you understand what the different rules are between your state, and the SEC.
Yes, absolutely. For sake of timing here, I want to make sure we get into some questions. Looking through the questions that have come in during the call, there's a few of them that do overlap some of the questions that were previously submitted that we hadn't gotten to yet. So we can kind of start going through some of those. There's a couple I still want to make sure I get Corey and David's input on as well. One that I wanted to address on here, because it does come up often. Rich asked, isn't another reason for going from state to SEC is if you have taken your practice virtual? I want to clarify a couple things on this around what we mean by virtual here, as the SEC does have an exemption under their prohibition from registering with the SEC. That does state that if you have an internet-only advisor, you can qualify for SEC registration. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a virtual firm, being that you work remotely with clients all over the country. What an internet-only advisor, if you look into the definition of that rule, it means that you provide investment advice exclusively through an interactive website or computer algorithms that prepare investment advice. Think of like Betterment, these robo-advisors. There's other technology solutions out there that are where clients or kind of the retail or kind of investment public uploads financial planning or investment profile information, and it spits out personalized investment recommendations. That's what that kind of subset of the regulation is meant to include. Is kind of those that are developing fintech, financial kind of technology solutions that provide personalized investment advice through computer websites or computer algorithms or interactive websites. There's also a few out there, I think Zoe Financial, and a couple others that have registered under that, because all they do is they solely solicit advisory services for other firms through an interactive website. Client uploads their personal information, provides some demographics and some other kind of unique information, and then they get recommendations to a number of other investment advisors. That's a solicitation activity. It's and it's online only, so those firms have qualified for SEC registration. And then kind of consistent there. One of the other ones I saw, Alan posted on here, how long does it typically take from initial filing with the state to approval? It's a great question, comes up almost with every registration, whether that be with the states or the SEC. I know I mentioned briefly kind of the SEC timeframe, sort of kind of once a complete application is filed, really 30 to 45 days. I think by regulation it's within 45 days. In practice, I think it's like 30 to 32 days. And they'll generally approve it as long as everything was submitted. However, at the state level, it's not quite the same story. It can vary substantially. Massachusetts is one that has an extremely thorough registration process. They'll ask 30 to 50 questions, sometimes more, around how your firm is expecting to engage in the delivery of these advisory services. And they'll ask some pretty specific questions around investment strategies, the use of specific funds, and it's evolved over time. I would be prepared for 8 to 12 weeks as the standard. That's where we see most of our investment advisor applications. From start to finish is usually when you engage. If you're going through like XYPN or a similar consultant provider, the time that you engage in drafting your disclosure documents, your Form ADV, your client agreements, to getting your approval, usually 8 to 12 weeks. However, unfortunately, there's a handful of states where it may take longer than that. Florida is usually pretty, they're behind and understaffed. Nevada has taken substantially longer, sometimes 6 to 12 months in a few cases. Keep in mind that a lot of this stuff changes as their staffing changes, their processes. But 8 to 12 months or 8 to 12 weeks is pretty typical, with several states that can definitely take 3 to 5 months. You can always try to contact your state securities division and see what they're, if they'll provide you kind of an ETA, or an estimated time frame for investment advisor registration applications, assuming a completed application has been provided. They may or may not give that to you, but that aside, I would say I would expect 8 to 12 weeks on average. And Corey, you registered in Oregon, right?
Yeah, I registered in Oregon. I would say I had a pretty abnormal experience. Mine was very, very painless, and Kendra was shocked. I think it took me about 45 days, and usually Oregon comes back with a lot of things to fix. And with mine, there was almost nothing. So it was really shocking. And I would say don't use my experience, because they told me it was pretty abnormal, and I just got very, very lucky. I don't know if it was the timing, because it was August 2020. It was when I put it in. So I don't think there was a lot of other firms launching around, like, a few months after the pandemic started too. So that helped things out quite a bit.
Okay. I saw Gregory asked, interested in how you best go about registering in another state. I think we answered this a little bit, kind of Corey's explanation of kind of registering in California. But ultimately, when you're registered in your primary jurisdiction, again, like this is going to assume you're state registered, and you know that you need to apply for registration. Usually it's initiated by filing, or I say usually, it's always initiated by filing a Form ADV and Form U4. So your Form ADV, your disclosure documents, that initiates the application for your firm. The Form U4 initiates the application for you to register under the firm. We generally file those almost at the same time to have those pending registrations working through. And then depending on the situation and the state, they may have additional documents they want to review as part of that application. This could be copies of your client agreements, certain custodial documents in a few rare cases, business formation documents, some sort of certification or affirmation that you're in compliance with your home state's financial reporting requirements. And ultimately, they'll have these additional documents. They'll either, sometime after submitting that ADV and U4, they might email you back with that information, or you can reach out to them proactively or find it on their website, and then they'll work through and send you an email with any questions they have, required changes they want to see, and then there'll be some dialogue back and forth, ultimately leading up to your firm's approval, as long as there's no disciplinary disclosures or anything that warrant additional questioning. Amy, how are we doing on time here?
We're doing well. We've got about 4 more minutes left, so maybe one final question for the group.
Okay, there was a couple things I wanted to just go over and get David and Corey's input on that we haven't covered in this area. And I know one of the big questions we get is around like cybersecurity, and I get the question a lot recently is cybersecurity insurance worth it? Do we need separate cybersecurity coverage? Corey, David, have either of you covered this or kind of explored it outside of your E&O policy, or is it something that you just kind of currently rely on your E&O policy and the provisions within that?
Yes, I actually added it a few years ago, and then last year, so I'm on use Charles Schwab as as custodian, and they now require a certain level of coverage. So I've had cybersecurity coverage, and I had to upgrade it. So I have an E&O policy, and then I have a cybersecurity separate policy. And I saw somebody asked the cost. My cybersecurity, I just renewed it, cost me $1,600, but I think it's money well spent. My E&O insurance is about $3,500, so between the two, it's $5,000. But I wouldn't want to operate without it. And the size of your firm is going to influence the cost. My cost has gone up as we've grown. So.
Yeah, and for myself, I just use the XY's E&O policy because there is some cybersecurity coverage in with that policy as well.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent. Thanks for that. Eric, I saw you had posted a question in here maybe a few minutes ago. If a new state is going to take a while to register the RIA, are you not allowed to take on your 6th client? I see Bill answered that too. Yes, you do not want to take on your 6th client until being properly registered. We've worked through this with a number. In a lot of states, I want to say that a handful of cases it may not be an issue, but it's not worth the risk. There are states, Massachusetts, for instance, Pennsylvania, Kentucky. There's a handful of states out there that ultimately they'll look at it as, it's black, if the rule is black and white, it's a clear violation, and they have the ability to fine you basically once you take on that 6th client, if you're not registered, all of the advisory services you're now rendering within that state are a violation, not just the 6th client, because now that you're registered, or now that you are subject to registration requirements, any activity that you engage in within that jurisdiction is subject to registration. So that 6th client does open up the door to kind of some regulatory ramifications there. So yeah, I would say great advice from Bill on that. It's, filing when you're at your 3rd or 4th client, unless it's late in the year, so you don't have to do renewals, because your registration fees are something that has to be paid annually. Renewal fees is usually the same. Some states they're a little bit lower or different. But yeah, that's the advice that we provide most commonly is if you're going to be picking up clients in various states, register when you get 3 to 4 clients in that state, so that you're not having to turn away prospects or kind of hold them off for a couple months if you're in a state that does take a while. Excellent.
Great. My gosh, I feel like we could keep going for another hour here easily. So I do want to thank our panelists and my co-hosts, Travis, Corey, David. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are going to host another compliance-themed free webinar this fall. I think we tentatively talked about November, Travis. So everyone be on the lookout for that. Maybe we'll have Corey and David back because we can keep talking. So thank you, everyone else, for joining us. We really appreciate it. Again, click that back to the lobby button. That will take you to our feedback survey. We'd love to hear how we did. Again, tell us some more topics that you want to hear about. Also, if you have some general questions about compliance, general questions about joining, or about launching your own firm, please schedule a call with one of our network navigators. They would be happy to help you out. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and have a great rest of your afternoon. I hope to see you all next month for our next webinar. Thanks, everyone.